As Director of External Affairs at Christians Against Poverty, I look after our policy and public affairs work, much of our campaigning, and our relationships with those organisations with whom our clients owe money. Christians Against Poverty, if you don't know, is a UK-wide debt advice charity that works in partnership with the UK Church. We have just under 300 frontline debt centres in partnership with UK churches in all 4 nations of the UK. And alongside that, we also run other services like money coaching, financial education for adults and young people, life skills, support for people living on low incomes for a chronic period of time, and jobs clubs, how to find work when you're long-term unemployed. And just a year ago, it was my privilege to bring in a new service that's on our website, which is the benefits calculator, where people can check that they're getting all the benefits that they're entitled to. I'm going to say a lot of numbers. I haven't got any slides. If they stick in your brain, write them down for yourself. You'll need a pen. But I'm not particularly trying to give you information. I hope to leave you with some kind of inspiration. You're going to disagree with some stuff I say, maybe. But I hope it provokes a good conversation within the group of you tonight and in the communities that you work in and represent. I'm personally very encouraged at the invitation. It was my pleasure to meet James and Pablo in Liverpool during Labour Party conference just a little bit earlier this year, when my team and friends from the Joint Public Issues team, the policy and public affairs work of the United Reformed Church, Baptist and Methodist Church, hosted an event to pray poverty onto the agenda, to listen to the voices of people who lived the experience of poverty, to listen to leaders in the city in terms of what you're doing and what you need, and then to pray on the streets. We walked to just outside the secure zone of the party conference, just as Keir Starmer was about to stand up and give his speech, and we prayed. We prayed that the voices of those struggling against poverty every day would be remembered, while parties have all kinds of ideas about what they want to do about their 5 missions or their 5 key pledges, whether they're trying to stop the boats or do some other kind of horrible racist stuff. I'm going to say it like I see it. You may disagree. Both parties are missing a mission. They're both missing a pledge. Neither of them have seen fit to tell any of us what they intend to do about poverty and why they should have our vote. I think that's a travesty. That's what we're praying about, and I believe God will answer that prayer in time. What am I going to do this evening? I'm going to keep an eye on James, who's going to wave at me when I've gone over time. Until I see him waving at me, I'm going to chat a little bit around why do I do what I do? So my theological motivations for seeking to address poverty with the whole of my life. I'm going to keep that brief because I think I'm preaching to the choir. I'm going to talk a bit about what's happening on the national scale in terms of destitution and the so-called cost of living crisis that I think somebody else in the chat has already acknowledged. Crisis? What crisis? Poverty's been around a long time. These people have been experiencing crisis a long time. It's only a crisis for the middle class tabloid readers who haven't been able to have a foreign holiday for 18 months. It's not a new crisis for people who are in the depths of poverty, or for those of us who've given our lives to working with them so far. So I'm with you, whoever it was. I reject the word crisis when it comes to cost of living. Poverty, a nation that tolerates poverty, that's a crisis that needs urgent attention. So there we go. So what's happening on the national scale? And I've been asked to take us back and think through, how did we get here? How did we get to a place where it seems that we're okay with 1 million children destitute? Like, nobody's burning tires in the streets. Nobody's climbing war memorials about 1 million children destitute. But maybe we should be. If you read, there we go, that one. I can't point. There we go. I kind of wonder, maybe we should. Maybe we should adopt the suffragette mindset or spirit about this and begin to refuse to tolerate what we're asked to swallow. And then finally, what can we do about it? And I'm going to come into land around the Let's End Poverty movement that I've been part of the initial steering group for. Some of you will have connected with in the various assemblies. And then I'm going to let you chat a bit and see what I spoke about. What did you agree? What did you disagree with? What's it provoked in you? So I hope that's okay. Here's my mindset. One of my favorite arguments is with people who try and tell me that Jesus was okay with poverty. He said the words, "The poor you will always have with you." But then he said the words, and you can do good to them whenever you like. And it strikes me that most of the time when people say to me, Jesus said, the poor you'll always have with you, poverty, it's going to be around forever. The majority of people who use those words with me are people who aren't necessarily doing good to them whenever they like and could be doing an awful lot more. But most of them haven't flicked far enough back in their Bible to God's initial plan. They certainly haven't gone back to the front page when the world was made perfect with no poverty, no need, work, but work was good. Work was worship. Work gave meaning and purpose, and the kind of the powers and principalities that cause and exacerbate poverty only came in with our fall, with sin, with the systems and structures that the world was set up on being broken by our actions. It was not God's intention. And then when he commissions Moses to go into Israel and this new way of doing life, this new way of doing nationhood, he tells him, I don't want any poor among you. And he gives them the rules of Jubilee. It gives Israel the patterns of civic life that would prevent poverty breaking in and having intergenerational impacts. That he gives them rules about looking after the sojourner, the refugee, the widow, and the orphan, those for whom the structures of a society begin to fall down, and make sure that there are no gaps through which people can fall for longer than a generation. So I think Jesus was really clear. I think he was quite clear. Look, the poor you will have with you, but hey, I'm at Bethany. I'm being anointed before Holy Week, before I go to the cross. Don't miss what I'm trying to do in the earth. I'm the true Jubilee. In me is the ending of all poverty. In me is the ending of all need. And then you roll forward to Acts when the early church begins to cotton on to this, and they sell what they have. They pool it at the feet of the apostles. They meet one another's needs. They consider none of their property their own for their own exclusive use, and they meet one another's needs. And I believe that was the first community on the planet to ever truly know God's heart, that there be no poor among you. So I think as the church, and whatever expression of church you are a part of or see from where you sit, I think God's will, our Creator, designed the earth in such a way that there ought be no poor, there ought to be no poverty, and in the end there will be none. And in my view, it's incumbent on all people of goodwill everywhere to do what they can to bring about that day when there is at least a lot less, if not an end to it. I think I'm called to see an end to it in this nation in my lifetime, and I think the clock's ticking. So I go back to the beginning. There was none in the beginning. I look at the last page, there'll be none in the end, and I wonder why we tolerate it now. And I certainly don't think we should use Jesus's words to give ourselves an excuse to tolerate it now. So that's my basic theology of it. I've got a more detailed and in-depth theology for it, but if you wanted to go to a theology class, you'd have gone somewhere else tonight. What is happening on the national scale? James has already grabbed one of my stats. It's outrageous, isn't it? 3.8 million people destitute, where going without food or heating or safety or clothing is a regular, for many, daily occurrence. That's just not okay. It's just not okay. Here's some other stats. I'm going to look around on my screen because I've got a whole load of them around for you. Let me give you some that I'm more familiar with because they're a bit more connected with my work. We understand that as Christians Against Poverty, 28% of adults in the UK are regularly skipping meals because of the increased cost of living. 1 in 4, a quarter of adults regularly skipping meals. A quarter feel financially insecure, and a quarter are finding keeping up with their bills and credit a really heavy burden. A quarter have daily anxiety about money. I mean, daily anxiety about anything is horrendous. Daily anxiety about money, something that we can do something about if we want to, is really quite something. A third of UK adults are losing sleep regularly over their financial position. 10% of adults in the UK agree with this statement. At various times, I have felt that the increased cost of living has made my life not worth living. 1 in 10 adults agree that the cost of living has made them question whether it's worth living. 50% of our clients who come to us at Christians Against Poverty have considered or attempted suicide before coming forward for free debt advice, considering it the most likely route out of their debt. The year before last, it was only a third. I say only a third. I mean, only a third. The year before that, it was only a quarter, a third, a half. I'm currently surveying our client base right now and have given one of my team the horrendous task to start writing next year's report, where I'm expecting to say that the majority of our clients in 2023 will have considered or attempted suicide before coming to get help for MS. The cost of living crisis, I said I wouldn't use the word, the cost of living crisis is costing lives. And we've been saying this now for a year to 18 months, and we need people to pay attention. 50% of our clients, and when we're partway through the debt advice process, we've put their budget together, we've got all the bank statements out of the bin bags, we've put all the numbers in the spreadsheets, we've made sure they're getting all the benefits they're entitled to, and we've begun to strip out any spending that is not necessary. Let me tell you, if you don't already know, and I'm sure you do, but people on low incomes in this country are better budgeters than I am, because they need to be, because that's how they stay alive. And so there's often very little that we can strip out. I'm the one with 3 times as many TV subscriptions as I could possibly have the time to watch. There's very little that needs stripping out, but 50% of our clients, when we're at that point, are already £250 a month light on their income to even start making payments towards their debts. So for a debt advice charity to have every other client that comes to us be one we can't help, because when you're in that much of a deficit, when you have that little income available to you to meet your basic needs even before you start repaying your debts, even getting you debt free through insolvency, through a bankruptcy, for example, won't have you sustainably debt free, because you need £250 a month from somewhere to meet your basic needs. So it's really quite frightening where we are at, and it makes me really frightened to read the press releases from the Department for Work and Pensions around what they will be announcing next week alongside the budget. Increased conditionality on benefits. That's more rules that you have to follow if you're receiving universal credit. If you are sanctioned on universal credit from next week, they intend to take away your free prescriptions and your free school meals as well. It beggars belief, right? But how did we get here? How did we get here? Because it hasn't always been this brutal. I mean, poverty has always been evil and brutal. It's always scarred souls and communities. It's always ripped the heart out of people and the communities in which they live. But it hasn't always affected quite as many people, quite as deeply or devastatingly as it is right now. 1997, there or thereabouts, a few interesting things were happening. Labour Party, New Labour came in. Christians Against Poverty was just about to get started. The Trussell Trust was started. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown start a mission to address child poverty and start introducing things like child tax credits to directly target particular forms of poverty with the kind of income that they really need. And when you see the graphs, and if I'd been a bit more of a slide presenter, I'd have shown you the graph. 1999 to 2010, child poverty reduced every single year because they saw it as a mission and they did what needs to happen to address poverty. They put income in people's pockets. Pensioner poverty stayed flat, began to come down. Pensioner poverty came down faster when the Conservative government introduced the triple lock on pensions, which guarantees the increase of pensions against earnings. But those two big downs, child poverty under Labour, pensioner poverty under the Conservatives, means we know how to solve poverty. We just don't want to. We know how to do it. It's putting income in people's bank accounts and ensuring that they have what they need to be able to participate in society. 2009, 2007, 2008 is where there began to be a real peak politically. That's when the banking crisis happened, and that began to drive a lot of our housing costs up. I went into huge amounts of negative equity that year when the interest rate on my mortgage shifted and the value of my home went down, and my wife and I were trapped in a house that wasn't big enough for our needs, and it was a really frightening time for a homeowner, like somebody, a privileged person. It was frightening for me. Now imagine you're one of the 3.8 million during that time. 2007, 2008 was also a real acceleration in the church. This is when a number of social action projects really began to get going, and that Christians Against Poverty and Trussell Trust, who'd been founded a number of years before, began to move out of double figures of centres into triple figures of centres across the country. And various evangelical churches, that's the wing of the church I'm most familiar with, really began to get a sense of how churches could partner with the state to better help meet needs in their community. And don't get me wrong, I think that's a beautiful thing. I really, really do think it's a beautiful thing. But I wonder whether the mindset of churches that got into social action 2007, 8 and into 2010, 2011 began to hear things like David Cameron's vision of a big society and think, oh, the church that's been disregarded and is ignored now has a place we can play. We're important again. We have a role we can play. My wing of the church has a narrative of being sidelined and of being persecuted. And believe me, evangelical Christians in this nation are not persecuted. We're really not. We're some of the most privileged people in the whole country. 80% of us are incredibly middle class, for crying out loud. But I wonder whether the motivation for getting into social action then wasn't really with a mind on social justice. See, when I started a debt advice charity in Coventry some 16 years ago, it was because I'd heard this mission, I'd heard this mindset out of the mouth of Philippa Stroud, of all people, Baroness Stroud, Conservative peer, that social action exists because social justice doesn't yet. We only have this work to do until the beautiful future comes in, and until the kingdom has come, and we can see more of the kingdom come in our day than I think we realize. So I always got into debt advice, caring about people who are experiencing poverty on the basis that it doesn't have to be this way, and we don't have to wait till the end to see it to be different. But some of my evangelical brothers and sisters do seem to have enjoyed a more cozy relationship with power these last 10 years. It's nice to have the government talking to you and asking you what you can do. It's nice to have them inviting you into number 10. I've been a couple of times. It's nice to have them celebrating the work you're doing in the cities in which you live. That can sometimes make it a bit tricky to speak back and speak truth to that power and tell them that some of their policies are causing increased demand for your services and driving down the funding streams that are needed to provide your services. And maybe these services shouldn't be needed in the first place in a fair and just and compassionate society that we would all choose to live in. I wonder whether some parts of the church have profited in the last 10 years or so, maybe 15 years or so, from the ideas behind the big society and have stepped away from our prophetic mandate to speak truth to power, to tell the powerful their responsibilities under God to look out for those with less. So I make no bones about it. The austerity agenda from 2010 has had a massive impact on poverty and has caused an awful lot more poverty than was necessary. It's caused a lot more loss of life than was necessary. I think none of it was necessary. And alongside that, there's some political complicity. The fight for power in a current two-party political situation does mean that even our current Labour Party, likely to form the next government, currently have to campaign as if they're not going to raise taxes. They have to sound like they can be trusted with the economy, which means they think we, the electorate, want them to not increase social security. They think we want them not to increase the tax base in order to pay for the kind of things that people need in society. They think that their route to power is to make the same financial promises to us as the current Conservative government do, and with a bit of a nod to us that we can trust them because they are Labour, they'll probably do some social justice stuff eventually. And I don't think that's okay. But I wonder whether some of that is just the way that our politics works at the moment and the way we as the public haven't indicated yet how deeply angry we are that millions of our brothers and sisters, made in the image of God, beautiful people with dreams and desires and gifts and talents, have that robbed from them by the grip of poverty. My challenge to the church would be if all we've done is meet needs in our community, but we haven't yet spoken truth to power, we've missed half of our mandate. And I'd also say to the other half, if all we do is get angry and say slogans like what I've got over my shoulder, but we don't know, we haven't made friends with and loved and lived alongside people who are struggling against poverty, then we haven't really been the incarnational ministers of God's coming kingdom that we're called to be. And so I don't think any of us who go by the name Christian really get off scot-free in my assessment. We all need Jesus. We all need his help. We all need some encouragement. And I hope I'm provoking encouragement. I think there are things that the church have done well. I think the prophetic wing of the church can learn from those who've got some social action going on. I think the social activists can learn from those whose hope is that of social justice. And that those of us who maybe are working for some political change also don't sound like our hope is in political change. Our hope is in the coming kingdom. Our hope is in a world where men and women and children are able to live in a world where the bonds of love and of shared values mean that there is no need. And I believe that's only available through the love of King Jesus. So I don't think my hope is not in Keir Starmer. Can you even imagine? My hope is not in anyone on this earth just yet. What can we as the church do about it, though? I think we can get angry. I think we should get angry. Do you know, I can't remember the last sermon I listened to in a church that I attend or visited as a visitor where the preacher has mentioned anything political. I don't remember the last time somebody pointed me towards genuine discipleship resources to help me make sense of my faith and the political world in which I live. Now, that's probably indictment on my wing of the church, but maybe it resonates with yours. Maybe you too are trying to rack your brains and wonder when was the last time you were given some kind of sense, not necessarily which party to vote for, but at least on which kind of issues to consider, who should get your vote. Did your church tell you that in 2022, poor people, disabled people, black people, brown people had their votes stolen from them by the Conservative government when they introduced the need for photo ID to vote? Did your pastor or preacher tell you that? Now, it's probably speaking a bit strongly to say that that was a deliberate act of voter suppression. The official reason for that was to eradicate electoral fraud. That was what was on the political bill, on the electoral bill. There have been 4 cases of voter impersonation fraud in the last 15 years. And now we all have to take photo ID into the polling booth. There's a local election in my constituency today, and I've had to show my driving license. People on low incomes, people who are disabled, people who work in low income roles who are disproportionately women and disproportionately black and ethnic minorities are less likely to have the kind of photo ID that you need to be able to turn up and vote. And I don't think that there should be a poverty premium on democracy. I don't think that there should be that kind of barrier to overcome. So what kind of things can we do about it? We can pray. We've all been praying. We can act. I see social activists right across this call and right through this chat. We can give. And I would just encourage us not to necessarily swallow the idea that the cost of living crisis being a cost of giving crisis means everybody's in the same boat. There are a decent proportion of people who are quite insulated from the rising cost of living, for whom generosity remains the call of God on their life, remains the call of God on all of us to live generous, outward-looking lives, right? And sharing what we have with those around us in need, and to love our neighbor and to love our enemy. But let's not deprive our brothers and sisters of the joy of giving by not asking. Let's make our needs known and maybe find ways to connect people with generosity. I love that example James gave earlier of connecting people with givers and with funders. That's me coming very close to the end of my time. We can act, and we can speak, and we can shout, and we can let our anger out. I hope we can create environments in or around our churches and communities where people can express their anger at poverty existing, their anger at poverty being tolerated by society, their pain through struggling against it for so very long and not being listened to or believed or trusted. I'm sure we can create those kind of spaces. I've tried to do so. I've tried to learn from people who are still involved in the daily struggle against poverty, which is why we built our Praying Poverty onto the Agenda work in Liverpool and in Manchester in the way that we did. We might be able to address some of that voter ID issue by working in a non-partisan way. You don't have to sound quite as angry or lefty as I am conscious I may have sounded this evening, to want to put in place the kind of structures where people may choose to vote however they would choose, where we don't need to tell people to vote blue team, red team, yellow team, whatever team, but we should make sure everybody in our communities has the ability to vote if they chose to. The Joint Public Issues team have some good resources on their website about how to help people in your communities get the necessary photo ID, which is free, but does need internet access. So it's not really free, is it? But we may be able to help people in our communities in that kind of way. And then finally, to bring it into land, we can agree that we should end poverty. We can join the growing movement of organisations, faith-led, non-faith-led, a diverse, growing movement of people who are united behind a vision for a UK where poverty doesn't keep people trapped, where poverty doesn't have people questioning the value of their lives, where poverty isn't robbing children their education or men and women their marriages and their homes. We can just decide that we're not going to be quiet anymore. We're not going to be complicit in a society that tolerates poverty. We're not going to be church leaders that don't talk about politics. We're not going to be church attendees that let our church leaders not talk about politics. We're going to demand that poverty is something that people in our circles of friends and communities and so on talk about and see and don't walk past. We can be a group of people who aren't content with simply meeting needs in our communities, but are prepared to raise our voices to challenge the need for our services, to say, why is it okay that 25 years ago there were 2 food banks in the UK and now there are 3,500 of them? Like, that, it shouldn't be that way. Imagine if each of those buildings and each of the 10, 20 volunteers in each of those was actually working to love neighbours in ways that weren't just about helping them survive the winter, but were actually helping those communities thrive rather than survive. Imagine what kind of world we'd be living in if that kind of community power was focused on lifting people up to thrive rather than simply meeting the most basic needs to survive. I'm really proud of the beginnings of this work on Let's End Poverty. I'm sure some of you will have connected with the initial movement. The big idea is that it's not about what policies need to change. It's not about what party needs to be in power. It's about giving space for men and women like you and me and everyone on this call, and particularly those that we love who and work with who struggle against poverty every day. It's about connecting them with each other to say, look, your local work in Liverpool and my regional work based out of Yorkshire and the national work that I'm involved with in terms of our policy and public affairs work. How do we connect all of that to show people in political power that you must have an answer for poverty if you expect our vote? You must say what you would do about it and commit to fund it if you want our vote. If enough of us raise our voice and connect our work one with another, we can show people in political power that there is more that they need to be doing than simply using words. And we can show people who struggle against poverty every day that those of us with the privilege to not have experienced it in quite a long time, it is some years since I last felt that sting, that we care, that we know what they're experiencing, and that we're not simply trying to meet needs to make ourselves feel good, pat ourselves on the back and get the ticket to heaven. We want to see heaven come to earth, and we haven't realized that until we've challenged everybody's tolerance of poverty.